I did have my black belt and I did have a fourth degree black belt under Samir, but it wasn't something it was recognized under Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at the time. So he told me, he goes, I don't know what to say, but maybe I could start you over again. Maybe you could start probation. And at that point, I started from white belt again.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of The Mountains We Climb. In each episode, we'll be diving into the mind of someone who has overcome significant challenge and adversity so that we, as the listeners, can get insight into what is really possible and what it really takes. I'm your host, Jordan Kilpatrick Smith, and today we're going to be exploring the journey of JJ Filipovic and his story through martial arts, entrepreneurship, and the mindset that goes into being a competitor and a coach. JJ, thank you so much for being here with me.
Thanks for having me, Jordan.
Just before we start, everyone, I'd like to remind you that right below this live video, you can comment and ask questions and be a part of this discussion today. And I really encourage that you do so. JJ, can you start us at the beginning? Where do we start?
I started martial arts when I was 6. That's when I first got introduced to it. I was into that for until I was about 15. And then I kind of drifted. Like most people as teenagers, they usually drift at that point. I came back in when I was in my early 20s, I think around the late 90s, and I was with Samir Saif. So he was my instructor for about 14 years. After that, I think I was starting to mature into wanting to start my own school. I started Fifth Dimension Training Academy January of 2012, and it was a huge leap. Actually, I was scared because I wasn't sure my qualifications for it. I started coaching in 2005, so I had a few years under my belt. But it's just the idea of running your own school, wearing so many hats as far as the administrator, running curriculums. It was super fun when you can just coach and train and have all these other things. But then you got to worry about rent now. You got to worry about the politics of how certain things happen and how you approach things. And then I also wanted to start my affiliation with someone. I knew I was a multidiscipline school. Like I trained under several disciplines under Samir. I kind of wanted to specialize into 1 or 2 martial arts in particular. So I pursued Muay Thai and Jiu-Jitsu. So for my jiu-jitsu side, that's actually the side I really started having a passion for. I used to go to Vegas a lot in my younger days with my brother and a few friends. But the one time, I think in 2010, I ran into Robert Drysdale at his school. Like he opened up a school in Las Vegas. I knew who he was. I knew his accolades. So I approached him when I started my school up about 6 months after I was open. It was funny because when I went to his school, he kind of looked at me and said, nobody's really approached me in this manner. I didn't really have the qualifications he was looking for as far as wearing his banner, wearing his name. So
which were
with
what?
My black belt. I'm sorry?
Like what were the qualifications he was looking for?
Well, it's more a matter of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a fairly tight community. So most people know who each other are. So if you look to start an affiliation, people tend to know who you are and people tend to know where you come from. I did have my black belt and I did have a fourth degree black belt under Samir, but it wasn't something it was recognized under Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at the time. So he told me, he goes, I don't know what to say, but maybe I could start you over again. Maybe you could start probation. And at that point, I started from white belt again. So, I stopped wearing my black belt. I put a white belt on and I was on a probationary period with him as a white belt, and I didn't get my blue until my first competition later that year. So it was pretty crazy that I would have to put this back on again. I would have to start to learn to compete again. I would have to learn all the new rule sets. At the time, I never actually competed in a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competition. So it was a bit daunting. It was funny because it was also, I went down to Vegas by myself. I don't think I told it too many people. I said, I'm going to go down, I'm going to go meet with Robert. I'm going to go and tell him, look, I run a school in Hamilton, Ontario, and I want to be affiliated under you. And I kind of assumed it would be yes, but I never really took away the fact that he might say no. But I think the fact that he said, well, start from the beginning with me and we'll see where we go with that. And yeah, I fly down there. I train with him as often as I can. I think at one point I was flying down at least every 6 weeks. I was trying to get in like 3 or 4 days there. I spent like a lot of time and money just going down to invest into it. But yeah, and then I just started competing like crazy ever since then. So yeah, I just climbed my way up to black belt with him.
So what was the first martial art you did? You said you did it from like 6 to 15. What was your introduction?
I started with Sensei Rick Mendoza. It was Aikido. So it was great. It was a really good martial art for a couple of reasons. The biggest one was it taught discipline, it taught conditioning. So, at that age, you don't know what you're doing really. You go in there, you get this gi, or you get this uniform that nobody really knows about, and you're surrounded by all these other kids who look like they know what they're doing. But the biggest part about it, that my takeaway as a kid and as when I was really young, is it kind of toughened my body up, because there's a lot of things, you learn to tumble, you learn to fall, you learn about your joints, how to stretch, how to do things properly. It's not so much the idea of fighting as it is how your body can move properly, and
Right.
how you can listen to instructors, how mentors work, and how listening equals learning equals benefits. So
Nice. And then you said, so after that, you took a little break and then you went and you trained under Samir, right?
yeah.
And
I
who
think
is that for
Samir,
everyone listening? Yeah.
Samir Saif, he's my first adult coach. He's the person who taught me my martial arts background that invested into what I do now. Like I said, for me with him, it was like, I don't know how else to explain it. For me, it kind of set my path and direction in martial arts. Without him, I probably wouldn't be where I am now. So, but for who he is a huge staple in the martial arts community in Ontario, and I would say even in Canada. He taught me most of my combatives for martial arts. A lot of my influence was from him, as far as it wasn't a particular martial art, but he was the type who would understand things because of the reality-based combatives that he taught. I understood a lot of concepts for striking, understood a lot of concepts for grappling and wrestling, but he also specialized in a lot of Muay Thai, a lot of boxing, a lot of Jiu-Jitsu. It was amazing. So from there, I found it's like when I went to engineering, it's the same thing. It taught my core interest in a lot of disciplines, and then I could really pursue what I wanted to after that.
Right. Nice. So it gave you this huge base to further narrow down whatever you wanted, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Cool. And so you said you got a 4th degree Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt under Samir.
I got a 4th degree black belt in Goshin Ryu, which is the style that he taught. It's also called combat reaction. So
Okay.
yeah, so it was a mix of the blend of all the martial arts that he studied over the years. So it was a lot of Wing Chun, Kung Fu, a lot of Jiu-Jitsu in there, boxing, Muay Thai. So it was a complement of a series of martial arts.
Gotcha. Okay. And then you said, well, I want to open this school. I want to pursue Muay Thai and Jiu-Jitsu. You wanted to affiliate under Robert Drysdale. You went down. Robert was like, you got to start at white belt again.
Yes. Yeah. So
what was that like for you, JJ? Like to have gone through all of that experience and then to be like, well, I got to take this belt off and put a white belt on again.
I didn't hesitate at all. Actually, I always think of that movie Dumb and Dumber, where near the end, Jim Carrey's character would say something, and then I can't remember, Lauren Holly, I think that's the other actress. She would say something like, well, maybe 1 in a million chance. So I was like, so you're saying there's a chance? You'll have to put a white belt on. I didn't think he would think I was as eager to say, okay, fine, I'll throw this white belt on. I'm not throwing away my black belt, obviously, because I treasured all the years that I've trained under that. But the fact that he said something that gave me an opportunity to train again, where I think a lot of people would say, you're asking me to throw something away. I looked at it as, you're giving me an opportunity to try to do something new. So
yeah.
That was my biggest takeaway from that too. It's it was a challenge to me. It was something he's saying, here's another path. It's going to take you longer to get there, but it's been about 8 years now for me of hard training, hard competing, training every day. But I got there, and if I would have said no at that point, it's still 8 years later for me, and I wouldn't have had the black belt I have now. So it doesn't matter what I did. The time's going to pass anyways.
Right.
So
I so love that message. This wasn't me having to throw something away. This was an opportunity for me. Right.
Yeah.
And the way that we can shift how we look at a situation can totally change the outcome of the situation, right? Amazing. And so what was it like for you to teach a school as a white belt? Or how did you manage that?
I actually didn't start teaching right away Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I still taught my what I had as a black belt in, which is the combatives and grappling. So I didn't have the specific rule set or the teaching method when I was a white belt still. I didn't start teaching till I was deeper into blue belt, like around my second stripe. So basically, I still continued to teach my combat reaction style for, I think, 6 months. And then as soon as I got my blue belt, I was like, okay, I think I'd be proficient enough to teach this. I've been studying a lot of the rule sets, the technique sets. When I first started, Robert gave me a ton of content of the direction of how he likes his classes run. So yeah, I didn't initially start that. You know, a lot of people knew that I was going into a new affiliation. I didn't even say who it was or how it was until it was cemented.
Right.
But yeah, so I didn't really start into that right away.
Gotcha. Cool. And so your first competition, like you are this really like a veteran martial artist, right? What was it like for you? Because you said, you know, it was this big challenge for you.
Yeah. So here's the thing is, I went down. Here's the crazy part about competing too, and I have a lot of my students who talk about being nervous about competing, and I've given different stories about it. I don't talk about this one so much as when I first started doing the Worlds in California, but this one was it was pretty funny because I went down, and it was my first Brazilian. Well, actually, it was my first grappling competition. I shouldn't say Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because it was under the Nagas. I fought in the Las Vegas Naga competition. So.
And for people who don't know what that is, can you explain that?
So Naga NAGA is the North American Grappling Association. It's a different federation than the IBJJF. So the IBJJF is recognized as one of the biggest grappling and jiu-jitsu competitions in the world. Naga is a very, very large and distinguished one for North America. So that was my first time grappling in a martial art or in a tournament for grappling or for jiu-jitsu in general. So I flew down. I was by myself. I didn't bring anybody down with me. And I was fairly new to Robert's school still, so I didn't know anybody there. I actually went in. I did my own weigh-ins. I did my own everything else by myself there, kind of figuring things out myself. Like I said, people, usually when I go to a comp now, I go with my students, I'll say, this is where you weigh in, this is where you go, you do this is that, this is like this change room, this is how you prep for it. I didn't know that at all, but I went in with a little bit of intuitiveness. I kind of figured out this is where you should do things. And I met up with Robert the next day at the day of the comp. So the day before, Friday night was my weigh-in, and then Saturday was the day that we compete. And I picked up double gold at the comp. And it was funny because that's where he actually promoted me. He promoted me on the podium to blue belt right away. He said, yeah, you're good enough to be blue belt. So it was funny because I was a little bit bigger than I am now today too. I think I was just a top end of heavyweight. And the only belt he had was one brown belt brought a spare blue belt, and he was lightweight. So I usually wear, like, I was wearing an A3 belt, which is a pretty big belt at the time. And all he had was an A1 belt. So he couldn't even really, I had a little bow tie on my waist. He couldn't even really tie the belt. He just looked at me, I'll get you another belt later on. But as soon as he gave me that blue belt, he's like, yeah, you're officially affiliated into Drysdale's Jiu-Jitsu now. So yeah, that was a highlight, definitely, of one of the big highlights and milestones of my Jiu-Jitsu career is that he gave me my belt on the podium. So
yeah. So what was that like for you? Your first grappling competition, you fly to a different country to compete in a North American competition, you win double gold, and you get promoted and officially affiliated under.
It was a lot to take in. It was pretty surreal, obviously. It's weird because if I look back now, I wonder what kind of courage I would have to take off, go to another country, meet up with a stranger, semi-celebrity, and say, hey, I want to be your best friend. Because that's pretty much how it felt like. I don't know what drove me before. Like, I just did it. And sometimes taking that leap of faith it pays off, right? It's the same idea as when I said I want to be affiliated with him. I walked in, I sat down at his school for about an hour watching classes before he walked past me a few times. I was so overwhelmed by his classes. He had 80 people in one room and 60 people in the other room, that I didn't even notice him walking by. And he didn't notice me. He probably just saw some new student from around the area. But yeah, just the idea of just flying out or just doing something so out of your routine and then figuring out that, it pays off. It was a huge reward. So the same thing with the comp, like just flying down there. And I always use the analogy. Sometimes I feel like I'm running down a hill with a blindfold. I just want to make it to the bottom. Oftentimes I do that. And like I said, I usually land on my feet at the bottom. So.
Yeah. And so does that come from a place of like self-trust? Like you trust that, okay, I'm running down this hill, I'm blindfolded, but I trust that I am going to land on my feet. Or does
Um,
it come from somewhere else?
there's a duality to it. There's some parts of it that like it's just I've failed with a lot of things in my life. You know, I don't want to say it's a bad thing, but with everything you do, with it, whether you win or lose, there's a teaching aspect. There should be a learning moment for everything you do. But the other side of that is, I always say this: I never step into a room without knowing where the exits are. This is a big thing I usually have. I take that kind of mentality into fighting. I take that into any kind of moves I make, business wise or financially or academically. I don't like to do something without understanding the concept of where things come from or how they're leaving.
Right.
So that's the same idea. Whenever I train, whenever I fight, I don't usually go into a position that will put me in such a bad spot that I don't know how to get out. And there's always tapping, anyways. But at the same time, I find that when I went down, I had the exception of knowing there could be a chance that I'll fail at this. You have to accept the fact that you'll fail. You know, that's like going in the ring and not expecting to get punched. It's the same idea, but it's not the idea of giving up after getting hit a few times. It's the idea of following through.
Yeah.
So that was my biggest part of that.
Yeah. And so what I'm hearing is that there was like you weren't afraid of failure, which I think a lot of people get really hung up on, right? They're so afraid to fail that they never try.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't know. The thing that really I'm trying to understand is when people compete, nobody is really afraid of getting hurt. It's almost like they expect that, yeah, you know what, I might get my arm hyperextended, or I might hurt my neck, or something might happen to me. The funny thing is, it's like public speaking. Nobody is afraid of the physical injury sometimes. What they're afraid of is looking bad in front of their peers. They're looking bad in front of their coach. Where, I mean, that's the fear that I think stops a lot of people from doing things, where if they're on the other side of the fence and they see their friends competing, you know, nobody's disappointed. Everyone's super proud of the fact they step on the mats. Everyone's super proud of you going to the ring. So it's the idea of the fear that other people might think badly of you or lesser of you. I think that's a real big mind game that people have with each other. And I think that was my biggest thing of when I went to go see Robert is it's not the fact that he would say no to me. It's the fact that I would fail and come back home and say, oh, well, I spent all this money. I did all this stuff. And, you know, if I'm not good enough for him, I'm not good enough for you guys. So I kind of stepped back and thought to myself, that's not how people would think. You know, that's not how things would happen. But it's a scenario you put on top of yourself, and that's a burden a lot of people put. I think that's why after a competition, people have they're so elated. They have such a weight off their shoulders, knowing the stress of competing is done. And
Right.
they know they come back to their corner, they come back to their area, and they see all their peers and all the other guys on their team, and they're so happy to see them, and you get so happy. That's how competition works. I don't know. I find that there's such a growth of knowing how you can overcome that kind of fear.
Yeah. And so when you're coaching a student who's about to compete and you can see or sense that nervousness in them, how do you approach that? Or if it's in yourself, how do you approach that?
I don't really get it. I don't think I would get that kind of fear. I actually get more fear from public speaking like this. This is where my fear comes out, because I wonder where I can drift off and have dead air and not even understand what I'm talking about anymore. So fear like that out of like physical performance or competition, I've never really had that. I've always said, like, in my earlier days, my example was I worked a lot of security when I was young, and I worked in a lot of positions where there was a lot more of a danger element. So the fact that I can go from somewhere where a person wanted to really hurt me, like somewhere and to a position where now I'm competing against somebody who's roughly my weight, my skill set. He's got kids. He's got a job. Or hundreds of people are watching this. There's a referee making sure the rules are fine. We both got full-time jobs, you know, so nobody really wants to get hurt, so they can't go to work. It kind of puts in perspective the fact that everybody who does competition, especially jiu-jitsu or Muay Thai or any kind of combative sport, especially on an amateur level, nobody's really looking to get injured. They just want to look for personal growth. They're looking to enrich the community, because if it was always a pro level fight where you're really looking to fight until you just win by any means necessary, I don't think it would be as popular. I don't think it would have such a big group of passionate people from such a wide spectrum. Like people who come in to train martial arts, it's not just, or former athletes or personal trainers or people who have this aptitude to be really strong. I've had IT guys, I've had engineers, I've had doctors, I've had everybody, all sorts of people come in. And I've even had people who come in and say, I got a job that's pretty high profile. I can't get hurt, or I can't have bruises, I can't have scratches on me. And then 3 months later, like, I want to compete, or I want to do something. I'm like, just told me you don't want to get hurt, and now all of a sudden, yeah, well, I got this like a little bit of a bruise under my eye, and one of my clients saw it, and it started a conversation, and it really opened up to disarm people as far as talking to them. So there's a misconception that, like, especially in martial arts, that there's this high ego in it and the ability to fight. Like, obviously there is a physical demand, but the level of ego there shouldn't be. Like, I'm not going to be naive enough to say that there is no ego, but there is far more encouragement and support in a lot of martial arts, I find, than not. So
yeah, and speaking from my own experience of martial arts is, I think, like, we as humans are very protective of our ego, and martial arts can be incredibly humbling and reminding that, okay, you know what, this ego is actually often gets in our way. Do you find that when students come in and they start to experience martial arts, that, like, do you see transformations in people?
Extreme changes sometimes. And it's almost, because in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, there's only 5 belts. So you have your white, blue, purple, brown, black. It's almost like you see a complete change or a complete growth or complete difference between belts. Like, the level of maturity that comes between them. It's not even so much a skill set. It's a maturity of what you do and how you approach challenges more. Because I do notice that people are a bit more temperamental or hesitant at blue, and then they're more likely to step off the ledge a little bit more at purple belt, and then brown belt. And as they start moving up, and then I think at brown and black, it's almost like it's just you float, you just move, you accept the fact that if there's a challenge, you're either going to go above, below, or around it, or just accept the fact that, well, this is a problem now, maybe I can learn how to solve it differently. It's pretty interesting to watch how people grow with it, and that's the biggest thing as far as being a coach. I always try and improve on. So as much as people always say, and that's a great thing about jiu-jitsu, is I don't think you'd ever master Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I've heard that there's always going to be a challenge. Say you're really good at, your upper half of your body is really, really proficient at defending. Your lower half gets really weak. Then you start, building up the defense or attack with your lower body. Your upper body starts being a little bit lack or slack and things. So that's the thing. You're always trying to keep yourself in check. There's always something to improve on. And that kind of reflects in the life too, I find, where it'll teach you that there's, as much as you're really well-rounded, there's always some parts you can improve on. So
nice. So Fariba says, good morning to both of us. And Dimitri says, what do you consider a personal failure?
A personal failure.
Now, I don't know if he's asking for a specific or just like the concept of personal failure.
Well, I'm going to try and give a broad example. I don't know. I think a personal failure for me would be, that's a good question.
And if you don't have an answer, that's okay.
I kind of have a few. It's more, it becomes an emotional loss more than anything else. I find a personal failure for me is if I can be as a coach and I find somebody is upset with the way things are going in the school and it's not jiving the way they want, but it's not, they don't want to leave. Or here's the thing is, when I teach at my school, one of the first things I usually say is I have a specific way of teaching. I have a certain way of doing things. I know there's a lot of schools with a lot of different spectrums and environments of how they teach. If you don't fit in with me well, you could probably go somewhere else, and I would help you find somebody who would have the same attitude you would have. I've had several students leave, and I've had a lot of students leave on very good terms, and I would help them say, well, this guy here, he's more competitive for what you're looking for, or this school here probably has a bit more what you want as far as the energy for, maybe it's a bit more relaxed, or maybe it's a different set you're looking for. For me, a failure would be if somebody leaves and they never train again, or if something happens so negative in my school that they just have a bad taste for martial arts in general. So, which I don't think I've really had that. Everybody that I've seen, and when I see former students and they go to other schools, I still say hi to them. If I see my comp, I'll shake their hand, or I'll even coach them if they have nobody in their corner. And it's more like, I just like to see people's personal growth. And I think a failure for me would be if they just stop growing.
I love that. What an awesome answer. So I'm really interested to hear, how do you think martial arts like impacts people's mindset? Because I know we just talked about how we like martial arts makes us look at a challenge and then say, now what? What do I do with this, right? How do I overcome this? How can I approach it differently? Are there any other like large parts on how it impacts mindset that jump out to you, or how it's impacted your mindset?
It's sometimes hard to answer questions like this, because when you're immersed in it for so many years, you don't realize some fear elements people have when they come into the place. I do have one student in particular, obviously I'm not going to name names, but he's middle-aged. He's around my age too. He's in very good shape. And he told me, like, when he first started coming, he would often sit in the parking lot and be scared to come into class. He would sometimes almost just want to drive away because he was scared. So this is a man who's in great shape. You know, it's not like and I don't want to slight this against anybody else, but like, if you're tinier or you're younger or you're extremely old or you're out of shape or something, but he wasn't. He was in great shape. He's very strong. He goes to the gym. And he would tell me, like, man, I would sit in the parking lot. I don't know why I'd be scared to go into class, but I'm scared. And then over time, as he started coming in more consistently, that fear went away, and it became curiosity of like, or wanting to learn more, or something about investing your time into understanding how it works. The biggest transition I see is they go from being scared of all these things that they understand to slightly understanding things, to starting to be able to, the metaphor I use is starting to have conversations so they understand how to go back and forth, to coming up and seeing brand new students who don't understand what's happening. And now that they understand the concepts of what's happening, they allow themselves to say, well, this is where I had my problems doing this technique or this position. And so you go from this idea of being scared to having an understanding to now, at some degree, being a teacher or being a mentor. And I think that kind of investment is probably one of the biggest things. So you hear about teachers, and teaching is one of the greatest rewards you could have. When you have something and you have a knowledge base that people really understand or they really are passionate about, and you can teach them that, I do think that's a great reward. And that's the biggest quality I see with martial arts, especially with jiu-jitsu. It's such a tactile martial art and such an alien environment for a lot of people to grapple. But when you understand the concepts of it, and then you have other people who want to learn it, there's no feeling like seeing somebody who is interested. And then this goes back to your other question of when you see people transform. When you see somebody go from not knowing anything to encouraging other students who are having problems, and it's such an encouraging environment for it. But that's a huge part of the reward of seeing how things grow.
Yeah. So people are coming in, they have this fear of unknown, this fear of all of, like, from my own experience, and for anyone who's not done jiu-jitsu, it's like the further out you swim, the bigger you realize the ocean is.
Yeah.
And at some points, it's like really scary to face this huge unknown, right? But am I correct in saying that as people start to get more comfortable with it, they start to be comfortable in this water, in this new environment, and then they turn around and they start to be able to share and teach their lessons with the people that are new and coming in, right?
Yeah, exactly. I always get akin to, I always use engineering as a parallel to martial arts a lot, is where you should never be scared of electricity. You know, just respect it, understand what it is and how it works, and you won't get hurt. And I think the same idea happens with martial arts and jiu-jitsu is the same thing. Don't be afraid of grappling, and don't be afraid of the fact that somebody could sit on top of you and do this and that. Understand the concepts of why this works. I mean, electricity will kill you right away if you don't understand what you're touching or how you're moving around it. So it's the same idea here. And I think this is for a lot of things in life, where if you see something that you don't understand, your initial reaction is to fear it. But if you can take a step back and not act out in fear or anger, and see why things work the way they do, I think that really helps break down why you shouldn't be upset at things anymore. You should actually, it takes a big problem and you can break it down to workable parts. You'd be able to understand why things are the way they are. So, I think that's, and again, that's about it, I guess.
We got a question from Kenny, and Julie would also like to know the answer. And I'm going to add a second part on top of this. So Kenny asks, how do you assess the success of a school? Is it the success of the students, the number of members, the general culture of classes? And what I'd like to know on top of that is more general, how do you assess success? Like, what is your definition of success?
I think that value goes depending on your perspective. For me, success for the school, well, we're still open. That's a big one. So that's a huge one for me. I don't think that having, like, financial success is a big thing with it. Only in the sense that you need to stay open. So there is a business side to having that. But obviously there's a lot of elements to what the success of a school means to me. There's a spiritual side, obviously. There's a emotional side, a mental side. But yeah, like I said, for me to see people who love to come in, and as much as this shutdown has been really hard for us, I've been trying to stay in touch with as many students as I can. It's very difficult, obviously, and trying to balance a few other parts of my life. But I think success for me is the fact that I still stay in touch. It's like a family to me now. Like everybody who I've talked to now, they miss it. They understand it. They know that we're coming back. And I could see what I don't have in contrast to what I did have. And I really want to, that's where my success comes from. Is the fact that we can run a school, keep it running, and we know that we'll be making it through this kind of a challenge, I guess, and seeing how we're going to grow from here.
Yeah. So does the success lie in the community created?
I think that's a big part of it. Definitely. I think the fact that, I look at the student body and I look at who stays there, who do we have as far as like their turnaround for going from being a pure student to I can walk around the room now and I'll see like 2 or 3 people who've been there for a couple of years and they're actually teaching the new people. So it's I guess it's a maturity of the student body sometimes too, is seeing how much they have grown themselves from that. So for me, that's a huge success.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. And then how do you think about success, like in general, in every area of your life?
It depends on my priority for it. So I obviously wear a couple different hats. So I wear a hat as a business owner for the school. So my biggest success for the school is that I could turn the lights on still month after month, year after year. As a martial artist, my success or my goal for the success would be having good students, having people who will approach black belt, and I've said that to people before, and I don't know if it's taboo or not, but I look at some people and I don't know if it's proper to say or not. Like sometimes I don't understand protocols of what you should or shouldn't do, but I've said to people, I could see you doing this tournament. I could see you being a purple belt in such and such time, because for me, it's helping people envision what they should see their next goals are. I think having that kind of ability to move forward and say, this is what you need to move forward with things, that's a big part of it too. So obviously there's other parts of my life, like I work outside of running the school too. So, and I have other passions as well. Like I said, I love being a technologist and an engineer too. It's another part of my life that I really enjoy. But yeah, like I said, I think I've done martial arts for more years than anything else I've done in my life. So
right, nice.
Yeah.
I think the role of the coach in helping people see a future and then helping them take action towards that future is such an important role to play. And whether it's right or not, the fact that you do it, I think is really commendable, because a lot of people would be afraid to step up and take that.
I was going to say that's my mindset for competing as well. Some schools are very hard set on wanting to compete. Other schools like to show their statistics on, only 1% of our membership actually compete in competitions or they do tournaments. I think we have like at 50, we have a very surprisingly high number of students who compete. I'd say we're probably about 80%, probably 90% of them compete. Almost everyone competes at our school. I think it's because of 2 things. Number one, I don't really put a lot of emphasis on how important it is to compete or how important it is to win at a competition. I think it's obviously very important to win. I don't encourage people, I don't say that there's no value in winning. I think it's very important that you try hard enough and do your best to win. But I maybe it's because of the fact that I have a couple other careers. So I have a career outside of martial arts that lets me see things in a little bit bigger picture. Not to say that I put 110% whenever I go and try and compete myself. I'm not going to go into it, halfway. For me, I think if you invest in something, you should invest all your time into it. But also, don't put yourself in such a high standard or high pressure position that it's going to backfire on you as well. So for me, I think competition does a lot of things that are great. My biggest thing is it sets deadlines. I think a lot of people who don't succeed at what they want to do is they don't set a deadline that's above what they can control. So my thing is, like, I say, I'll do like the Worlds or the World Masters in August, and it's a hard deadline. For me, I have to, and it's the hardest part because it's right over the summertime now too. So where a lot of people, I see people on patios or having drinks or going out with friends. I can't do that really. I can't afford to do that if I'm going to be competing at the end of August. So for me, it sets a discipline and a deadline for me that I have to make weight. I have to be in good shape. I have to be able to do this technique, or I'll have something that sets me up for that to whether succeed or do the best I can at it. So for me, I think that's the biggest part.
Yeah, that's amazing. Fariba says, by far one of the greatest mentors anyone could ever have, and that this interview is so inspiring. She never wants it to end. So that's awesome. Thank you for being here, Fariba, with us. Oh, I had a question and now I forget it. I don't know. It's gone.
Because, yeah, it's the same thing. I always said that for competition, it's the same thing. When you talked about personal growth, fear management is a great thing I always find with competition. And the one thing I always say whenever we compete is, even if you sign up, what I love about it is, if you want to miss a workout, you always think, well, I look at my bracket, I look at how many people I'm fighting, and I see like all these names. And half the time you're very intimidated by the name itself. So You'll see this name, that guy's name, he looks pretty tough. So I better start working out this morning. So oftentimes when you really want to try and work out 5-6 times a week, but you only end up doing 2 or 3 times, sometimes that turning point, sometimes that decision you make is based on the fact that you know that your competitor is working out right now, where you probably wanted to watch one more episode on Netflix. I don't know, Food Chef or whatever you're watching is on there, and like, oh yeah, I gotta watch the way they bake this cake.
Yeah.
But instead of that, you really should be in there, just getting at least one more set, and you definitely always feel better after a workout. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It came to me what I was going to say, and so I just want to backtrack a little bit. So often we set up these huge expectations for ourselves, right? And whether it's a conscious expectation or not, we set up like these, we just like set the bar so impossibly high. Yeah. And then we look at it and we're like, well, crap, there's no way I'm ever going to do that. And then we feel so defeated and distracted before we've even started, right?
Yeah.
Do you have any tips for people that are experiencing that? Do you have any tips for people where they just set their expectations like impossible for themselves?
I find it's ebb and flow. Like for me, it's that pendulum swing. I'm guilty of it too. Like I know that I actually, even when this shutdown started, it was pretty rough on me. It was really stressful. One of the biggest stresses I had with it was the fact that I'm not training anymore. My routine shot. I can't do this. I can't do that. I actually ballooned up to around 225, which is pretty big for me. I haven't been that in years. But as soon as I started understanding the fact that I have to set my own routine, I have to work towards this, I started coming back down again. I'm slowly getting back. I'm probably about halfway to my fight weight and competition weight again, and competition mindset. But it wasn't easy to start because you don't have a reference point. The hardest thing for me was the fact that I don't know when this shutdown's over. So I don't have a deadline. So every time I try and set one, say, all right, I'm gonna start working out now. And I think my first class, and I better be in shape for this, will be second week of May. And then as we start approaching second week of May, okay, it's going to be the end of May. So the fact that it's this dragging timeline where you don't know how long you're going to have to do it, it makes it that much harder. And I think that's the biggest fault a lot of people have, is they start working out and they're wondering, okay, how long do I have to do this before I hit my goal? And then if I have to do this for 20 years, I'm not going to do it because, it's hard right now. So the biggest thing I have, and this is why I like competition, is it's a hard deadline. It'll say, okay, after this, you can take a break. After this, this is where your reward comes in. So I think a lot of times your body or your mind wants a reward right away. Like they want to know that if you do this much, if you do X, Y is going to be what your result. My big thing is, when I first started working out again, I actually didn't do awesome. I was making that joke that I thought I had COVID. I thought I had the respiratory problems, but I was only on the treadmill for 5 minutes. So I was breathing hard, like everything was shutting down. But it's just because I haven't brought my heart rate up to like a good physical level in so long that my conditioning sucked.
Right.
And I said, okay, I'm gonna start running 7 days a week. I'm going to start dieting like this. And then the next day I'm eating ice cream sandwiches, watching somebody else do a workout on YouTube. And I'm like, I'll start later on. So there is procrastination into it. But at the same time, I think I said this before to you on a different cast, is having one bad day inside of 3 shouldn't tell you to quit. It shouldn't tell you that everything's lost. One bad day is not going to kill you. Just start again the next day and start your routine again. Or, keep going through with it, and then after about 5 days, if you have 2 bad days, then deal with the 2 bad days. The next week, if you have, 3 bad days, deal with that. Then the next week, start with 2 bad days and start working your way down. It's a process, right? And it becomes habitual. I always had that argument between motivation versus discipline. I think I always said discipline is always more important than motivation. Where you don't have a deadline, discipline will always follow through. Motivation is just, to me, it's just as important now. For me, motivation is setting up for a competition. For motivation, it's like making sure that I have something to set up towards, a goal. For discipline, it's just the lifestyle you want to live with it. So yeah, everyone goes through failures. Everyone goes through setbacks. I think, like I said, for me, I have a certain number of months of forgiveness in myself versus a certain number of months where I need to be accountable for my school. I need to be accountable for my own health and my own body. So, I do think that there's certain, like a percentage that you should allow for yourself to be a bit more relaxed.
Yeah. Michelle's saying, absolutely, it's not all or nothing. It's all or something is okay too.
Yeah.
And for my own clients, I see this very often is this all or nothing. And if I can't do it perfectly, then I'm not going to do it at all.
Yeah.
And I think that often keeps us stuck. And what it sounds to me like what I'm hearing from you is that like quitting just isn't like, it doesn't sound like that's even in the picture. It's like, okay, so we've got this stuff on the table, right? Yeah. Maybe I had one bad day. It's on the table here. Now, what am I going to do about it?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So what I look at is like, you don't think about all the things that you lost by eating, I always use ice cream sandwiches because apparently that's all I eat. Yeah, so just because you have like 2 or 3 of them in a day, the one day, doesn't mean that it's a loss for all the work you did before. So right. I guess it's almost like that when I talk about my black belt. I had 14 years to get to my 4th degree black belt. Doesn't mean that that's thrown away when I put a white belt back on. So, there are a lot of things, there's a lot of history behind what I've done to make me progress to the next goal. So
yeah,
always move forward.
Yeah. And so I just want to ask one last question before we wrap up. This is from Dimitri and it disappeared before I got to it, but so I hope I get this right. And I think he was asking is like having that vision of where you want to go. So let's say I'm envisioning I want to win a competition. Does that become like a self-fulfilling prophecy where it's like in the envisioning and in the working towards it that it becomes the self-fulfilling prophecy that you are going to achieve it? Or do you have a different take on that?
I've set so many goals for myself over the years. And there's one thing I've come to note about setting goals for myself. No matter how big they are, how small they are, I'll always hit them, but they won't always be exactly how I vision them.
Nice.
So it'll be something I want. It's not necessarily the whole something I want, something I need thing, but it's more like I got what I wanted. It wasn't what I thought it would be, but it's what I wanted. So it's very similar to where I want it to be. A lot of things I've set as far as goals, and it's the same thing as like winning. For me, my next goal would be wanting to win the worlds, the World Masters. And I visualize it. I visualize the time, like, oh, I trained for it, and I'm on top of the podium. I got my gold. And it's you think of all these things, and I've set enough goals, and I've accomplished enough goals where it's at the point where I know I'm going to hit it one day. I have to train hard for it. It's not going to be easy, but I know it's probably not going to be exactly the way I envisioned it. But I know that it's a goal set for me to set towards.
Right.
So, it doesn't matter what it is. Like if you want that new car, or you want, you're working towards buying a house, or anything else as far as a mindset, I do find that you do hit it as long as you keep striving towards it. And it might not be exactly what you envision as far as like, oh, I'm going to get that 5-car garage, I'm going to get this and that. But what you end up with is something that you probably will be much happier with, or you'll feel such a sense of accomplishment for what you want when you hit that goal.
Yeah.
That was a huge thing for me too, as far as goal setting. Even with the school, I often thought about how it would be to run a martial arts school before. I think back in my teens and early 20s, I'm like, yeah, it'd be so cool if I had a school. I'd be doing this and that. The school I have now is nothing like I pictured, like 20 years ago. But it's something I definitely envisioned. So
right,
it's something I definitely wanted to do for as long as I could remember. So,
yeah. Very cool. Well, thank you so much for being here with me, JJ. Thank you for being on this podcast and sharing. Like, you have so much knowledge and so much wisdom, and I know I'm so appreciative, and reading the comments, so is everyone else listening, that you are here to share this with us. So big thank you for being here. Next week,
thank you very much, Jordan.
Next week for episode 5, and that is Saturday, May 30th. We're going to be having Sue Sedana on. Sue is a life coach, a strategic interventionist, therapeutic touch practitioner, yoga teacher, entrepreneur, and she's fostered, parented 17 children, raised 2 kids of her own. And what we're going to be exploring is her journey of overcoming the invisible barriers that people don't see, like self-doubt, looking for validation outside of yourself, and all of that fun stuff. So you can find that right here, 10 a.m., May 30th.